Hi there, this is Dr. Evan Osar with Integrative Movement Institute. Hope you're having a great start to your week. Happy Tuesday. One of the questions we get so many times is, my clients feel like they're tight in their hip flexors, or I feel like I'm tight in my hip flexors. So I just feel like I need to stretch, and then I do all these crazy stretches and kneeling and half kneeling and leaning and side bending and twisting to open up their tight hip flexors. However, are their hip flexors, have you ever questioned, are their hip flexors actually short and tight, and do they need stretching? Because when I learned in school 20-something years ago, yeah, I was taught that everybody had tight hip flexors, everybody has short, tight hip flexors like the psoas and the rectus femoris and all those other muscles, and everybody's got weak glutes and abdominals and all those other muscles that they would talk about. However, when I first started working with professional dancers in Chicago, I realized a lot of these clients look like they're in an anterior pelvic tilt, these dancers, and then when I would test them, they didn't have short and tight hip flexors. They actually had long and over lengthened hip flexors. And when we look at how our clients sit, I'm going to tilt this down just for a moment so you can see me sitting. Most of our clients aren't getting tight hip flexors from sitting, because unless your client sits like this, which most of your clients don't sit like this. Why? Because number one, it's hard. Number two, it's not super comfortable. What's an easier way to sit? They will sit like this. So then which muscles are becoming longer? Which muscles are becoming shorter? First, real quick, when you sit, optimal sitting is actually sitting on your sit bones and stacking your cylinder, your thoracopelvic cylinder, on top of your sit bones, the bottom of the cylinder. So that way, it's very easy to sit in this position. There's very little effort required. But for most of our clients that are stuck in posterior pelvic tilt, which most of them are, this would require a lot of activity, so this would be very hard for them to sit this way. They don't sit that way. They sit like this. And if we take the hip flexor, so let's just take the rectus femoris, for example, that attaches from this bone. So if you find your ASIS, the pointy bone right here, find your AIIS, your anterior inferior iliac spine. That's where your rectus femoris attaches to, or originates from, or attaches to, and then attaches down to your patellar tendon. So if we sit in posterior pelvic tilt, you will see that that muscle is actually getting longer, not shorter. So that's getting longer. What's getting shorter? Well, it's the muscles on the opposite side, the glutes and the hamstrings. So the glutes and hamstrings are here, and I go into posterior pelvic tilt, which is how most people sit in their car, on their couch, in a chair. Those muscles are then shortening. So why do my hip flexors feel tight? Well, if you take a rubber band and you stretch a rubber band, it feels tighter. If you go into posterior pelvic tilt, do this with me. Stand up. Put your hands on your pelvis. Go into posterior pelvic tilt or more posterior pelvic tilt, because most of us are already there. Feel your quads. Feel your hip flexors. Feel that rectus femoris again. And then relax it. Go back to where more optimal position is for most of us, more anterior. It's soft here, quads relaxed, hip flexors relaxed. As soon as I go posterior pelvic tilt, that gets ropey and tight. Just like this rubber band. That's why your clients are feeling tightness in the back of their hips. So do we really need to be stretching a muscle that's already overstretched? And this is why so many of your older clients, because of spinal stenosis, they're stuck in posterior pelvic rotation or posterior pelvic tilt, so they're living their lives in posterior pelvic tilt, so their quads, their hip flexors will always feel tight because they're hanging, those muscles are just overstretched and they're basically hanging off those muscles. That's why that is what also shortens their stride and why they walk with small steps or small stride length to their gait patterns. So, are you saying, Dr. Osar, that many people are wrong? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying, is many people are wrong. Where should we be lengthening? We should be teaching our clients how to lengthen to their posterior hip. That's why some of your older clients also don't bend forward and do a good job of it. They just bend through their upper back because they don't have the ability to rotate their pelvis to then bend forward. And if you start looking at your clients, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. Will you have clients that have shortness of their hip flexors? Sure you will. However, not many of them have too short of hip flexors and too long hamstrings and glutes. The people that actually need hip flexor lengthening is a lot of your clients have spent too much time stretching their posterior hip, which is not too many people, right? It's maybe some of your yoga people, some of your, maybe your dancers, maybe. But even as I mentioned, the professional dancers, I worked with all the professional dance companies in Chicago, and almost never did a dancer come to me, almost never, this doesn't make sense, rarely did a dancer come to me and need more length, actual length. They had over lengthened hip flexors already. Maybe for dance they needed more length, but compared to what normal, not even normal, that's not a good word either, an optimal range is, they had optimal length of their hip flexors. They just needed more for dance. So they needed more optimal range for their dance. So think about your everyday client now. How many of them really have a need for more length in their hip flexors? What they need is more optimal stability and control of their thoracolpelvic cylinder. They need more optimal control in hip extension. So one of the things we teach our clients is when they're lengthening their hip flexors, if you so desire to do it, which I don't think a lot of your clients need it, is when you align them, make sure they align well and make sure you're maintaining alignment of the cylinder. Because if your goal is to stretch the hip flexors or lengthen the hip flexors, well, you better maintain control above that. So why would I be stretching like this? Because that's just making sure that, ensuring the client is going to go into hyperextension of their back. Teach them how to control the alignment here and actually get the length here where they need it, not in their low back or not through their abdominal wall. Teach them how to align, control, and then hinge forward so the length is here to the front of their hip where they are trying to get it, not through their low back. So this is very important because we see so many clients that have struggled with physical therapy or chiropractic or massage therapy or doing exercises they found online. Why doing exercises you find offline actually isn't a great idea, even though I do tons of exercise online. It's really more for an education so that you understand that you're addressing the right areas. And that's what we teach in the integrated movement system, is teach you how to address the right areas. In fact, I'm teaching this here in 2 days or 3 days. We have our first live course in over a year. We have an online webinar next week with Functional Aging Institute where Jill and I, my fellow anatomy geek, and I will be talking about the hip flexors and some of the myths around the hip flexors. Hopefully you learned something from this video that many of your clients, they may have over lengthened hip flexors and need a strategy to shorten them actually and use them appropriately. Because just like this rubber band isn't super effective if you just stretch it and leave it stretched out, your muscle isn't so effective either. Your fascial tissue isn't effective either when it's been overstretched and maintained in that position. You may need to shorten it so that you can have the ability to lengthen and shorten the tissue. And that's where Michael McAleese, how are you, sir? Another integrated movement specialist. That's where soft tissue work with a manual therapist or your self-myofascial release tool becomes so valuable because you shorten the muscle fibers so that they have the ability to lengthen, eccentrically lengthen appropriately, and then shorten as well appropriately. And it's the ability to move through this sort of optimal range of lengthening and shortening, which gives your tissues optimal health, reduces trigger points and myofascial tender points, as well as gives better ability just to maintain posture, alignment, and optimal movement. So this is Dr. Evan Osar with Integrated Movement Institute. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it made sense. Do this on yourself. Grab a rubber band, put it on your AIIS, your anterior inferior iliac spine, put it on your patellar tendon, go into posterior tilt, go into anterior tilt, and tell me how did most of your clients really sit, and are their hip flexors actually shortening? Do it for yourself. You'll get proved, maybe you'll have a new thought process as you do that little experiment. And then also look at their forward bending, because if they're in anterior pelvic tilt, then how come they have so much trouble getting into forward bend? And why is their strides when they walk so short? Because again, if you had long hip flexors, I should say, if you had short hip flexors, it would actually, I should say, when your hip flexors are over lengthened, it will shorten down. And again, we just proved it to you. It will shorten down your stride as well. So, thank you so much for being part of our community. Thank you for all you do for your clients. If you're looking for more information, check out IIHFE on Instagram. We post there all the time, videos, education, and inspiration to help you be the leader for your community, for you to attract more individuals that need, want, and will pay you for your expertise, and more importantly, so that you can be the light. Because people out there right now, they need a light. They need somebody that's unifying and not dividing like our leaders are doing today. So be that leader for your current clients, be that leader for your potential clients that are looking for someone just like you. Thanks for all you do for your clients, for our communities, and for the wellness of our world. Make it a great day. We'll see you next time at Integrative Movement Institute.